Modern American misogyny is anti-Hispanic in two parts. Part 1, A Tale of Two Colonizers. So, first I want to start this with a toast. A los antepasados, to the ancestors. So, you will hear it sometimes said that all colonizers are the same. And that's not really true. There were two colonizers. There were the Hispanics. Cortés made first contact with the Mexica, what the colonizers call the Aztecs. And there were what we on the border call the Anglos, which means people who were colonized by Protestants, right? The British, etc. And this is not about race. Let's not forget, as people often do, that there is an entire diaspora of Afro-Latinos that often gets forgotten. This is about who colonized you and what effect that has on your culture. And it really doesn't matter if you stay with the Catholic Church. I'm an atheist now. But I still wear a rosary to represent my Chicanismo. I'm Mexican. And that's a culture thing. Not so much a belief thing, right? It's, if you could call yourself culturally Catholic too, sometimes that's it, right? So, I want to acknowledge that what was done to the indigenous is unexcusable, okay? And to many of these indigenous, these colonizers and the monarchs that led them are the Hitlers of the indigenous, right? That said, I'm talking about the differences in these two colonizers from what it meant to be a woman in these cultures. I know more about the Hispanic side, okay? So you often hear us saying the woman's place is in the home. To those of us in touch with our Mexican history, particularly the revolution, particularly the borderland, that means something totally different to us than it means to Anglo culture, okay? I'm going to unwind after a hard day out and about. So, let's not forget that at the time first contact was made, this was 1519, it was Cortés, okay? During this time, Isabella and Ferdinand were the monarchs. Now, those who are familiar with Hispanic history know that between the two of them, Isabella had the stronger personality, the greater power, more money, and she had more vuelo, right? Ferdinand had his talent. He was a good negotiator, a diplomat, etc. He often did and excelled at things that were commonly considered queenly powers, right? Isabella was basically the lion of the Catholic Church and brought colonization in the name of Catholic Church to the new continent. When the English started coming here, their monarch was Elizabeth. So let's put this in context, and this is something that people often overlook. When colonization happened, the ones in charge were the women. It was Isabella versus Elizabeth. Queens of the patriarchy, there are various respective types of patriarchy, and I'm going to explain how patriarchy was done different in the home in these two cultures. But think about this, and it often makes me laugh because I think about this and then I hear the modern brosogonists, is what I call them, talking about how they don't believe a woman should lead and a woman's place is not to lead. And their cognitive dissonance is this misogyny was gifted to them as a consolation prize after being defeated in colonization, our men of color. But they have such a boner for proving that women can't lead because those who were in charge at the time of colonization were women. Monarchs. Okay? So, in the Spanish culture, Isabella went on to make sure that women in the home had 3 protections, and these were 3 protections that Anglo women did not have. 1, if for some reason the marriage was annulled, which was very rare, but it did happen, whatever the woman brought to the marriage, her dowry, etc., was hers, and she took it with her. Okay? 2, the children were her children, first and foremost. Not the husbands. The mothers. Okay? And 3, and this made all the difference in the world, if you really think about it. If the husband died, unlike under Anglo-colonizer culture, the son wasn't the heir of his fortune. He might have had a will and divvied some up again, this and there. But it wasn't the son, the eldest son, that inherited everything. It was the wife. And if you'll look in the borderland history, there are many widows that went on to manage the estates of their husbands very successfully. Look up Bayi in the coastal bend. Now, of course, you'll find the husband's name first and foremost, but often what you don't hear about after that is that after he died, the woman, and for some reason, Hispanic women, massive, bastante, we outlive our husbands. I mean, we'll live into our 90s, and the grouchier we are, the longer we live. I don't know what it is. But this made all the difference in the world. And so, to us, now think about my culture. I'm a Tejana. I self-identify as a frontera. My patriarchal line, my father's history, is directly tied to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. We managed a land grant for the Spanish crown in the area that was transitioned over at the time. And we were supposed to become neighbors and Americans and but they ended up doing a lot of violence against my family. Okay? The Texas Rangers did. Fuck the Texas Rangers. So, what this meant was you're on the rancho, okay? The rancho was like the city. This is like a big ranching culture. There's a lot of open space, right? And often there were little villages around, maybe various mixtures of mestizaje or city cultures that have been busted and integrated, etc. And they would often run away to the ranch like my great-grandfather did. He ran away to the rancho to find work, not knowing that the patron was his father. But that's another story. So, but this rancho was somebody's home. And the men worked outside. This was a ranching culture. We worked with cattle. We worked with longhorns. They brought those cattle over here, I think it was from Spain, and they went wild. And they went feral in Texas, and they became the longhorns. And they were a great source of meat. Oh, God. Texas Tejano food is so good. But such barbecue. But this was a ranching culture. So this, a woman's place is in the home. Well, basically, you're talking about the equivalent of, like, if you'll take the Game of Thrones reference, you're talking about the Lady of Winterfell. Not some little meek woman in a gilded cage made for her by an overbearing man who wanted to make an example of her to everybody around him, some kind of trophy. The Hispanic woman in her home was a lioness. And a lioness is most fierce in her own den. Three protections. So what this also meant is that because the women inherited the wealth, once the Mexican Revolution started, a lot of times money funding that revolution came from rich old women. Because if there was big money and it was old, it was probably a widow who had it. The husband had probably died. Hispanic women, bastante, we always tend to outlive our husbands. I don't know what it is. I think it's because in the Hispanic culture, to be a widow is seen as like the equivalent of being a veteran. Because women do war in our bodies, especially back in the day when we didn't have modern medicine and women often died in childbirth, right? Whereas men did war outside and they didn't live as long. And so women funded much of the Mexican Revolution. And here's the difference between modern misogyny and old-fashioned Mexican machismo. This wasn't a shameful thing. This was our culture. We all knew it. But you won't find a lot of the names of the women who funded the revolution when you do your standard academic research. A lot of times, if you want to find out the history of Hispanic women, you have to go through word of mouth and you have to go talk to the women of the families. Because when violence is done to our men, we keep the truth in silent. Okay? But you won't find a lot of their names. Not because they were ashamed of the woman's power in the home. They knew it. We were colonized by a lioness. It was because it was very dangerous to do this. And the men of the culture knew how dangerous it was and what was at risk, especially for a woman. And if anything happened, they would rather be murdered or they would rather spend time in prison than have the woman go. So often the woman who kept the money did it in silence. These were very powerful women. These were very behind the scenes, politically powerful women. These were not the quiet, gilded cage, trad wife images you see. That is white misogyny. That's colonizer, bro. You're selling out your own women and our proud history. Have you never heard of the Adelitas? Do you not know your culture? When you embrace this modern misogyny and sell out the women of your culture, you're letting white supremacy colonize what is left for them to take from us. You are a race traitor. And I said it. Peace.